I think, like a lot of other people, I've been driving the wheels off of Automobilista 2's newest content recently. Both the Le Mans Daytona class and the iconic Circuit de la Sarthe have provided the most amazing playground over the last week, and it seems to have drawn a lot of people over to AMS2. But for those that are on the fence about this content, whether that be a lack of familiarity with the cars and track, or perhaps not knowing how to get the best out of these cars through Automobilista 2's driving characteristics, I'm hoping that this video will help tip you over the fence, and also help improve lap time, consistency, and ultimately overall enjoyment of the sim. So here we go. Let's talk about Le Mans. It's worth saying right away that this track guide isn't meant to demonstrate an all-out fastest lap like you might see in something like a time trial. Instead of that, I'm intending to show what a good racing lap would look like in something like a multiplayer session where the car's carrying several laps worth of fuel and the track conditions are far from ideal. So as we're talking about it, let's have a look at the conditions. We're running on the 10th of June, 2 PM, but it's a green track, so the combination of a low grip surface and high temperatures will make these laps a little bit trickier than usual. You can see I'm just putting the setup back at default and then adding 60 litres of fuel, which is just over half of the fuel tank for these cars. Now, setup changes that I'd recommend, certainly a click less rear downforce, just to increase the oversteer at high speed, but then I'd also lower the rear anti-roll bar stiffness a touch, just to make up for that change in balance. We could use an extra 5% maximum braking force, but it's really important that we open the front ducts by 2 clicks. And finally, I like a little more engine braking, a little less traction control, and we're safe to run a 65% opening on the radiator. And we're good to go. So we're jumping on board now. We've just done our outlap at full push, and we're setting up for the timed lap. We're actually going to be running balanced ERS throughout the whole run, just again to reiterate that this is a race lap, not a hot lap. And leaving the pits with 60 litres means that we're crossing the line with just under 51. So, heading into the Dunlop chicane, we want a late apex to straighten out the braking zone as much as possible. As soon as we're straight, hit the brakes, and then trail into the left, using the throttle to stabilise the rear and slowly guide the car through the right. Similar thing coming up. Once we're through Chapel Bend here, we want to brake just after we straighten up, and then down to 3rd gear and gently guide the car through the left and the right here of the Forest S's, avoiding any sort of jerky movements that might destabilise the car. Track limits are very generous for Tête Rouge, so commit early. It's better to cut than go too wide, because you don't want your exit being compromised onto the Mulsanne straight. Basically, from Tête Rouge all the way through to the Porsche curves, exit's your priority. If you don't exit a corner well, you're going to punish yourself all the way down the straight until you reach the next heavy braking zone, which can result in a lot of time lost over a lap. Now, look to the left, and where the Armco barriers overlap, hit the brakes. Trail brake all the way through the right, cutting the curb on the inside, then get some extra rotation by using the curb on the inside, straightening up, and then power down back onto the Mulsanne straight. You will have seen already that there are a couple of corners on this circuit that don't have very clear markers in terms of turn-in point or braking point. The entrance to the Forest S's is one, same goes for Tête Rouge as well. Another corner that's a bit sketchy is the upcoming Michelin chicane. Using the braking boards on the right, you want to brake at about 115 meters. Trail brake all the way through the left, so that when you reach the right, you cut the curb and you're already getting on the power. Now, we're on the approach to Mulsanne corner, which is one of the slowest corners on the circuit. This is by no means a necessary thing to do, but as you'll see, I nudged the brake bias back 2 clicks. This basically means that we get slightly better braking power overall, but also we're far less likely to lock the fronts and go in the gravel. Look for the start of the curb on the inside, brake hard, rolling off the brakes once we get to 2nd gear, and committing to the apex so we can get on the throttle as early as we possibly can. I mean, we probably turned in a bit too early on this lap, but I guess you'd rather turn in early than late, because you don't want to hit the gravel on the outside. Particularly as heading into Indianapolis, this is probably the best place to overtake on the circuit, because you can then use the Porsche curves to build a bit of a gap. So if you did adjust it, remember to put your brake bias back to 58 at this point. You're looking for the end of the AstroTurf on the left. When you hit it, 50% brake pressure into the right, use the throttle to straighten the car up, and then down to 2nd gear for Indianapolis, using the camber to swing the car around, ready for Arnage, the slowest corner on this circuit. Again, it's a corner without a very clear braking point, so I'm braking at about 70 meters before the corner, I think, and you will have seen that I also brought the brake bias back by a couple of clicks. That's once again just to minimize front locking, but also just to help with rotation on turn-in. now the Porsche curves. So same AstroTurf braking point as before, but we want to be gentle on all inputs here because we really do not want to suddenly have the car sliding on us. But we can use the throttle pedal just to help keep the rear tyres loaded throughout this sequence of corners. And ideally you want to keep it tight here through karting just so that you can prepare a better exit for the Corvette corner here. I mean, yeah, you can see it got away from me a little bit just because I was slightly too eager on the throttle input through karting. Now, if like me, you've been clenching all the way through the fast corners, then you want to stay clenched for the forward chicanes. Brake just before the curb, and track limits are incredibly liberal here, so you can really commit, particularly here, dabbling both the throttle and the brake just to try and keep the car balanced all the way through until you hit the start-finish line where you can unclench and relax. Phew, well, there we go. That's one lap of Le Mans. And yeah, I have to say the Cadillac VSR is a really, really nice car to drive. It's got good top end, it's very, very responsive without feeling overly nervous. Yeah, I'd heartily recommend trying this car if you haven't already. But of course, there are two other cars in this class. There's the Porsche 963 and there's the BMW M Hybrid V8. So you might be thinking how the three cars stack up against each other. Thankfully, Razor have done an incredible job balancing the three cars, so they're all equally competitive. So, for the sake of interest, I did exactly the same thing with the Porsche and the BMW. And you can see that I've aligned all three attempts, so you can see how they compare. But in terms of driving feel, there are slight differences between the three cars. I noticed that the BMW felt a lot more nervous, but also a lot more responsive, and that responsiveness, you'll see, does result in a slightly quicker lap time overall. So I think if you're looking for ultimate pace, the BMW is probably the fastest of the three cars, but only by a slight margin. In stark contrast to that, however, the Porsche is the softest overall, so it feels the most compliant, the easiest to deal with. But unfortunately, it also does come with a slight caveat, which that it works its rear tyres harder than the other two cars. Now, under a lot of situations, this wouldn't necessarily be that problematic, but you'll see later in the lap that the Porsche suffers massively in Sector 3, where the other two cars don't. But as you can see, even though we're hopping around the lap with these three attempts, the three cars are incredibly close together heading into Arnage. And, you know, I'm very, very confident that you'll be able to dial out some of the characteristics you may not like using some setup work, and you won't lose any pace as a result. But back to these laps, you can see just how committed you can be in the BMW. It just sticks to the tarmac. I mean, the Cadillac's still holding up pretty well here, but it's the Porsche that really suffers. If you watch through this right and then the left, the rear left tire is already at 110 degrees Celsius, and as you can see, I'm just having to correct the car through the corner, and it's losing me a lot of time, 6/10 in total, and moments like that just make it a little harder to commit for the last four corners here. So yeah, it's something that can probably be dialed out with a little bit of setup work, but it certainly gets sketchy when the rear tyres are hot. But anyway, coming across the line, the BMW has a 1/10 advantage over the Cadillac VSR, with the Porsche coming in nearly 8/10 behind the BMW. So yeah, as I said before, if you have an exit that's compromised, it really hurts around this circuit. So there we go. I'm hoping that this video helped with track acclimatization, because I think one thing I'd really like to see is the multiplayer community in Automobilista 2 become as competitive as it possibly can. I think we would all gain a lot from that. So yeah, if you think this video might be helpful, then feel free to share it around. First time trying something like this, so I hope you thought watching it was worth your while. Thanks.